White Motor Company didn't fail because it built bad trucks. Its trucks were respected. Its dealer network was established. Its manufacturing had been refined over 8 decades. What White had wasn't a product problem, it was a structural one. The trucks were fine. The business surrounding the trucks was not. White Motor Company started in 1900 in Cleveland, Ohio. Thomas White and his brothers had been making sewing machines successfully enough when they turned their attention to automobiles and trucks in the very early years of the industry. The timing was good for a well-capitalized manufacturer with machining expertise and an established distribution network. And White moved into steam-powered and eventually gasoline-powered vehicles in the years when the rules of the market were still being written. And a capable manufacturer with real resources could establish a position that would be difficult to dislodge. By the First World War, White had built a reputation for producing reliable commercial vehicles, and the military contracts that came with the war were significant enough to establish the company as a serious manufacturer at real scale. The trucks White supplied to the military performed well in conditions that were significantly harder than anything commercial use had required, and that performance record translated into credibility in the commercial market after the war ended, and the soldiers who had driven those trucks came home and went into trucking. Reputation earned in wartime service was a meaningful commercial asset in the trucking industry of the 1920s. The interwar years were good ones for White in terms of its core business. Commercial trucking was expanding rapidly as the road network improved, and as diesel power started becoming practical for freight hauling, and White was building vehicles that competed credibly across multiple categories. The company was not at the very top of the premium segment. Peterbilt and Kenworth had staked out that territory, but it was a serious manufacturer in the mainstream commercial market with a product line that fleet buyers and independent operators both used. The post-war boom was transformative for American industry generally and for trucking specifically, and White participated in that growth. The interstate highway system created demand for long-haul freight capacity that the industry scaled to meet, and truck manufacturers who could build quality vehicles in quantity benefited from the expanding market. White's manufacturing capability in Cleveland was real, and the company's engineering had kept pace with the industry's development well enough that its trucks remained competitive through the 1950s. And then, starting in the 1960s, White's management made a series of decisions that look in retrospect like the slow unraveling of a company that had been sound, made overconfident by a period of good conditions. The acquisitions started. White bought Autocar in 1953, which brought a premium cab-over brand with its own loyal customer base and its own manufacturing footprint into the company. Autocar had a long history and a specific identity in the vocational truck market, heavy-duty applications like concrete mixers and refuse trucks, where the cab-over layout made operational sense and where Autocar had earned a reputation for durability that went back decades. On paper, this looked like a sensible expansion, adding a complementary brand that served markets White wasn't directly competing in, with manufacturing assets and customer relationships that had real value. But managing a multi-brand company in trucking is harder than it looks from the outside. You're not just adding products, you're adding separate engineering programs, separate dealer networks, separate manufacturing facilities, separate supplier relationships, separate corporate cultures. The economies of scale that justify acquisitions in theory require a level of operational integration to actually materialize. And that integration is difficult, time-consuming, and politically complicated when the acquired company has a strong identity and employees who are invested in it. White and Autocar remained more parallel than integrated for years after the acquisition, which meant the parent company was carrying the cost overhead of two largely separate businesses. Then came Diamond T, acquired in 1958. Diamond T was another established truck brand with its own history going back to the early days of American commercial trucking, its own product line, its own customer base. The same logic applied: add a complementary brand, capture synergies, build market presence. And the same execution challenge applied, actually making the combined operation work in a way that generated the efficiency gains the acquisition was supposed to provide. White consolidated Diamond T with Rio, another truck manufacturer it had acquired by the mid-1960s, to form Diamond Rio, which was its own management challenge. Operating a business that is the combined remnants of two acquired companies, each with its own history and its own organizational DNA, is not a straightforward task even under favorable conditions. The integration of Diamond T and Rio into a coherent combined operation took resources and management attention that might have been better directed at White's core business. By this point, White Motor Company was operating multiple truck brands, White, Autocar, Diamond Rio, each with its own engineering programs, its own production facilities, its own field service and parts support infrastructure. The complexity was real and it was expensive. The synergies that were supposed to make the whole worth more than the sum of its parts were not materializing at the rate the acquisition rationale had assumed. And the debt that had been taken on to fund the acquisitions was sitting on the balance sheet, generating interest expense regardless of whether the integration was going well. I remember looking at White's financial statements from the late 1960s and early 1970s and noticing something that was easy to miss if you were only looking at the top-line revenue. The company was generating substantial revenue from its combined operations. Enough to look healthy at a glance, but the margins were thin in ways that reflected the cost burden of carrying multiple manufacturing footprints and multiple brand infrastructures without the integration efficiency that would have justified them. The revenue was real, the profitability was fragile. The relationship with Freightliner is a piece of this story that a lot of people don't fully understand, and it's worth spending some time on because it shaped White's position in the market significantly. Freightliner had been founded by Consolidated Freightways as a way to build trucks to its own specifications, rather than buying from existing manufacturers. And through the 1950s and 1960s, it developed a reputation for lightweight, fuel-efficient trucks that appealed specifically to operators who cared deeply about payload capacity and operating cost per mile. In 1951, Freightliner and White entered an agreement under which White would sell and service Freightliner trucks through its dealer network. Freightliner got distribution, White got product to sell in a segment where its own trucks weren't as competitive. That arrangement worked for both parties for a long time. White's dealer network was extensive and well-established, and putting Freightliner trucks through it gave Freightliner a market presence it wouldn't have been able to build as quickly on its own. For White, having Freightliner product in its showrooms filled a gap in the premium long-haul segment and gave dealers something to sell to customers who wanted the best fuel economy available. The two companies' product lines were complementary enough that the arrangement made practical sense. But the Freightliner relationship also revealed a structural limitation in White's position. When your dealers are selling another company's trucks alongside your own, and some customers clearly prefer the other company's trucks, you are not actually capturing the full value of your distribution network. You're sharing it with a supplier whose interests are not identical to yours. Freightliner was building its own brand recognition through White's network, and as that recognition accumulated, Freightliner's negotiating position improved. The distribution arrangement that had initially been favorable to White became less favorable over time as Freightliner's product reputation grew and its options for alternative distribution increased. When the relationship eventually ended in 1977, it created a significant gap in White's product lineup. The trucks it had been offering under the Freightliner arrangement were gone, and White had to either fill that gap with its own product development or lose the customers who had been buying through that channel. Product development takes time and money, and by the mid-1970s, White had both less time and less money than it needed to address that gap effectively. The economic environment of the 1970s made everything harder. Fuel costs spiked after the oil shocks of 1973 and 1979, and trucking customers became significantly more focused on fuel economy as a purchasing criterion. White's conventional trucks were not optimized for fuel efficiency in the way that the Freightliner products had been, and the gap that had always existed between White's operating economics and the best performers in the market became more visible and more consequential when fuel costs doubled. Operators who were selecting trucks on the basis of total operating cost rather than purchase price were increasingly looking at alternatives. The deregulation of trucking in 1980 added another layer of pressure. When the Motor Carrier Act of 1980 removed the rate protections and licensing restrictions that had structured the industry, the competitive environment for both carriers and the manufacturers who supplied them changed significantly. Carriers that had been operating under the regulated system with predictable margins suddenly faced open price competition, and many of them responded by cutting costs wherever possible. Truck purchasing decisions that had previously been made on somewhat traditional bases, brand loyalty, dealer relationships, historical preference, became harder-edged cost analyses. And White's trucks, carrying the overhead of a complex multi-brand corporate structure, were not always winning those analyses. By the late 1970s, the combination of the lost Freightliner revenue, the increased competitive pressure in a deregulated market, the fuel economy disadvantage relative to the most efficient alternatives, and the persistent overhead of managing multiple acquired brands had pushed White into financial territory from which recovery would be difficult. The company was generating losses, it was carrying significant debt, and it didn't have an obvious path to the operational transformation that would have been required to become competitive in the new environment. At one point during this period, the people inside the company who understood the financial situation were trying to manage a set of constraints that didn't have clean solutions. Reducing the brand portfolio would have been one path, focusing resources on White and Autocar, which had the clearest market positions, and divesting or winding down the Diamond Rio operation, which was struggling. But divestitures take time to execute and don't always generate the value you need when you need it, especially when the market understands that you're a seller. Cutting manufacturing capacity would have reduced overhead, but also reduced the company's ability to respond to demand if and when market conditions improved. Bringing in new investment required finding investors who believed the underlying business was sound enough to justify the risk, in an environment where the financial statements didn't make that case easily. White filed for bankruptcy in 1980, which was the same year trucking deregulation took effect. A coincidence that was somewhat ironic given that deregulation was supposed to be good for the industry broadly, even if its near-term effects on established operators were disruptive. The bankruptcy did not immediately end the company's operations. White continued producing trucks through the early 1980s under various restructuring arrangements, and there were efforts to find buyers for the various brands and operations. Volvo acquired the White and Autocar brands and operations in 1981, which was a significant moment for several reasons. Volvo was a Swedish manufacturer that had been building its presence in the North American market for several years, and the White acquisition gave them manufacturing capacity, a dealer network, and brand recognition in the American market that would have taken years to build organically. The White name appeared on trucks produced under Volvo ownership for a period after the acquisition, maintaining some continuity for existing dealers and customers. The Autocar brand survived into Volvo's ownership and eventually passed through additional changes in ownership to continue as a vocational truck brand, which it remains in some form today. Diamond Rio, the combined operation that had been created from the acquisitions of the 1950s and 1960s, had a separate and messier end. Operations wound down through the early 1980s, and the brand was eventually gone in any meaningful sense, leaving behind mostly a name that showed up in occasional discussions of American trucking history and a few surviving trucks that collectors found interesting. The Cleveland manufacturing facilities that had been the center of White's operations, the physical infrastructure of assembly lines, tooling, supply chain relationships, and skilled workforce that had taken decades to build were dispersed through the restructuring and ownership changes. Some of the physical facilities were repurposed, some were eventually closed. The workers who had built White trucks through the decades before the bankruptcy moved on to other industries or other manufacturers. The institutional knowledge and the manufacturing culture that had accumulated at those facilities over 80 years of operation dispersed in the way that these things always disperse when a company stops existing, gradually, person by person, as people retire or move on, taking with them what they know. What's worth sitting with about White's story, more than the financial specifics or the sequence of acquisitions, is what it tells you about how companies in capital-intensive industries like truck manufacturing create and destroy the conditions for their own survival. White's management in the 1950s and 1960s was not incompetent. The acquisition strategy was a recognizable playbook for building market position through consolidation, one that other industries were pursuing simultaneously, and that sometimes worked. The problem was execution and timing, and the specific characteristics of the truck manufacturing business that made the acquisition model harder to make work than it looked in the planning assumptions. Truck manufacturing requires sustained engineering investment to remain competitive. The products are complex. They evolve continuously in response to customer needs and regulatory requirements, and a manufacturer that falls behind in product development loses customers who notice the gap. Running 3 separate engineering programs across 3 separate brands is more expensive than running one, and the synergies from sharing platforms and components require the kind of deep integration that White never fully achieved across its acquired brands. So the engineering investment got spread thin, and thin engineering investment shows up eventually in products that don't quite keep pace with the best alternatives in the market. The dealer network, which was one of White's genuine strengths, was also made more complicated by the multi-brand structure. Dealers who are carrying multiple brands with overlapping customer bases and partially competing products have to make decisions about where to direct customer attention and sales effort, and those decisions are not always made in the manufacturer's best interest. A dealer who is more profitable on one brand than another, or who has better supply and service support for one brand, is going to push customers in that direction regardless of what the parent company's strategy says. The brand portfolio that White had assembled created those kinds of mixed incentives throughout its dealer network in ways that were difficult to manage from the corporate level. I noticed something when I was looking through the trade press coverage of White's situation in the late 1970s, which is that the coverage consistently described the company as having good people, solid manufacturing capability, and genuine market presence, while also being in financial difficulty that those assets couldn't resolve. That combination, quality organization in an unsustainable financial structure, is a specific kind of corporate situation that's more common than the failure narratives usually acknowledge. The people on the factory floor in Cleveland who were building trucks well into the late 1970s were not building bad trucks. The dealers who had been selling White products for decades had real customer relationships and real market knowledge. None of that was enough to overcome the structural financial position the acquisition strategy had created. The trucks that survive from White's production over its 8 decades are well maintained by the people who have them, and the older models in particular, the cab-over-road bosses, the White conventional trucks from the 1970s, the Autocar vocational trucks that keep showing up in working condition decades after they were built, have the kind of durability that reflects genuine manufacturing quality. The product wasn't the problem, which is the thing that makes the story worth telling, because most industrial failures get explained by the product, and White's failure had almost nothing to do with the product and almost everything to do with the decisions about how the business around that product was structured and financed. The Volvo trucks that came out of those Cleveland facilities after 1981, and the Autocar vocational trucks that have continued under various ownership structures, are the direct descendants of what White built. The manufacturing knowledge and the engineering competency that White developed over 8 decades didn't vanish. It got absorbed into other organizations that were better positioned financially to apply it. That's a different kind of ending than pure destruction, but it's also not the ending that the people who built White Motor Company were working toward, and the distance between those two outcomes is the whole story.